Get ready to dive deep into Buffalo's vibrant music scene because we're stepping inside the fabulous Flamingo Lounge for the 8th season of Local Music Magic. In the Flamingo Lounge with Rockabilly Greg is more than just a podcast. It's a collection of stories that delves deep into the vibrant musical history of Buffalo and Western New York, creating a living archive where each story adds a unique thread to the overall narrative. This season, we're taking a deep dive into the heart of the music community. Join us for personal conversations with musicians and industry pros, where we celebrate the collective creativity that makes our favorite artists, venues, and events so special. But before we get started, I'd like to give a big shout out to our sponsors, CatsLikeUs.com, Diamond Hawk Golf Course and Pub, and valued supporter Buffalo Ironworks for helping to keep the music alive. Harry Altman, Buffalo's Master Showman by Susan Fenster, is a biography about the impresario who ran the famous town casino and Glen Casino in Western New York, bringing major stars like Sammy Davis Jr. and Jayne Mansfield to the region from the 1920s to the 1960s. Susan Fenster graduated from Buffalo State University with degrees in history and journalism. For more than 30 years, she has built a career as a writer and author, specializing in nonfiction with a focus on New York State history. It is my honor to welcome to the Flamingo Lounge, Susan Fenster.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I've been looking forward to this. The town casino, we all know it right now as the town ballroom, but it has quite a history here in Buffalo. And you just recently published a book. It came out December of 2025?
November 2025, yeah.
And it's flying off the shelves. And I've been looking so forward to hearing the stories about it. But as you know, and you told me you know about my aha question, but I figured a little bit different because you're not a musician.
Right.
But I wanted to know, like, when did you kind of have that moment where you said, man, Harry Altman, that's a guy I got to write about?
Well, I didn't know anything about Harry Altman. I didn't even know his name, but I live now in the village of Williamsville, but I grew up in the city of Buffalo. And going to the Glen when I was a kid was like everyone else is going to the Crystal Beach. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I knew when we're going, down Main Street and seeing Campbell Chevrolet that's where we're going. And I had such fond memories. So it was January 2020. That's an important date. I mean, not for the book, but
Right.
to put it in perspective, it was winter and I was walking through the Glen and I was trying to remember where everything was back in those days. And then I thought to myself, well, I'm just across the street from the Williamsville Library, so I should just go over there and see what I could find. And I found out that Harry was, and of course I didn't know him as Harry yet, that entire Glen era, the Harry Altman Glen era, was in none of the books of Williamsville history.
Wow.
And just a glancing mention in the town books, town of Amherst books.
Okay.
So I asked around. I am a historian, so I asked the people at the Williamsville History Museum and everything, and they said, well, it was a few reasons. It was a pretty anti-Semitic time back then. Altman's kids were the first kids that went to Williamsville schools, as a matter of fact. And then there was connections with him, they thought, with the mob. And then if you think about the disruption of the village during that era, the Glen Casino could seat 800 people, 3 shows a night. So and these were not small Toyotas or Japanese cars that were coming in to be parked. So the turnover, anyway, everybody had a very bad taste in their mouth about the Glen during that era. And then we have the 2 major fires that happened. So he was just wiped out. And I did not know that he owned the town casino at this point.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, I took his name from whoever could give it to me, and I started to research it. And then COVID hit 2 months later. And I worked in a way with healthcare, so I still stayed busy. But I had time to dig, but I couldn't go to the libraries. So I just hit the phones. Anybody with the name of Altman or any of the old people from the 60s and 70s that were on the village board or whatever. And then I just started piecing it together. Then I found out about Harry Wallens, who was his partner at the town. And I thought for at least 6 months that Wallens was also involved in the Glen. I mean, it was that raw.
Mm-hmm.
I knew nothing. I was coming from nothing, which I think is a rare way to be, but it was a very valuable way to be because,
Yeah.
I have no preconceived notions. And the irony is that the Glen and the town are so nostalgic right now because the people that remember it or have heard of it, they weren't living the adult life with all those cars and all that noise and all of that those are their parents. They remember either their amusement rides or going to see Paul Anka in Glen, or of course going to the Inferno. And if you think about when the Inferno was around 66, 68, many of the men that were at the Inferno went off to war, were drafted. So that was their last hurrah. So the energy for knowing about the Glen and then the rides and, all of that. And if you've been to the space now, the Glen Park, it doesn't look anything like it did, obviously, during the Altman era. And so everybody always asks, how do you get all that stuff in that space? And the truth is, that's all man-made that you see there. Since 1973, they got a federal grant, to make it a natural park. And it was flat, and it was asphalt, and 8 acres of asphalt. But it's really hard for people. They think, how could you ride the boats? Where were the boats? Were they in the duck pond? And I'm like, there were no duck ponds. There were nothing. Harry used every square inch on asphalt to build that property. So I started very focused on the Glen. And then I found out about the Wallens family, and they've been very, very gracious. Harry Wallens was his partner on the town casino side. And one of his grandchildren said that she was going to write a biography of the town casino. And then when I knocked on her door, she's like, here you go. I don't have to do it now.
Right.
And there's really no way in Harry's life or in the lives of the town and Glen Casino to separate the two, because one was open, the other one was closed. There's so much interconnection between the two of them. So I just decided that it wasn't going to be a nostalgia piece, which is how I started it. I thought I would just publish pictures of the rides and the different entertainers that came through. There was 2 buildings at the Glen, the town Glen Casino, which is what most people remember. But in the back, it was either called the Family Inn or the Barn. And that's where people like most of the jazz greats played there. Because if he didn't think that you could fill a building 3 nights a week for a week, because it would be a week-long schedule for performers coming in, he would have you out in the barn. So yeah, it was something. Those entertainers went through a lot, and they had to come and stay a whole week somewhere, either in the village or in the city. And they had 3 shows a night, 7 nights a week. So they worked really hard. But that's the genesis. That's my aha moment.
Oh, there you go.
And I couldn't let that go. First of all, the bottom line is the anti-Semitism angle really bothered me. And the question now that the book has been published is, and it comes from the last song of Hamilton, who lives, who dies, who tells your story?
Right.
Who does live? Harry's mentor, I can't say mentor, but hero was Michael Shea. And in Buffalo, Shea's name is still very strong.
Sure.
He's a generation older than Harry Altman. And, we honor him. Shea's Buffalo is right across the street from the town ballroom. Donnie and Artie has done a great job keeping the flame going. But no one was carrying the torch, so to speak, for Harry.
Right.
So now I start thinking about a lot of different people in our lives and in our entertainment, in our everything. What biography wise, memory wise, who lives and who doesn't. So Harry was almost lost to time.
Right.
And that was one of the, when I would talk to some reluctant people about Harry for various reasons, I said, this is the last chance you'll probably get, because no one's going to go back like I have for 5 years and dig and dig and dig and dig. If you have a story, if you have a picture, if you have a memory, you have to share it with me now, because, you know, I don't think anybody is going to come by later and sweep this all in.
Right. Well, you know, one of the things that when I decided to do this podcast is I was talking to a friend of mine, and I think after I started, but because I always thought about Paul Harvey, the rest of the story. Let's hear the rest of the story. I want to know. I want to know the other stuff that's not out there. But I was talking to a friend of mine, and he says, you know, I was reading somewhere where there's a theory we all die twice, and of course, the first time is the obvious time. And the second time is when people stop talking about us. And I said, well, I don't want people to stop talking about what we've got here musically in our community, because I love the music. And
Right.
Of course, you could talk about, there's so much history, theater and art and all that here in Buffalo, Western New York, but kind of to stay focused, right? And I'm just scratching the surface. You know, I've got a couple hundred episodes under my belt, and we're just starting to scratch it. I mean, it's crazy how, you know, and then when I saw that you wrote this book, I'm like, yeah, I want this to be, I'm glad you wrote it, but let's have it, you know, in oral form too, you know, so that
Thank you.
it can live. And I think these stories are important to our area, you know, so.
And there were a lot of important nightclubs in downtown Buffalo. I mean, Harry by far was the largest. But, you know, Shayami and all of there were many that brought in major, and that was all lost. And I stumbled upon it now.
Right.
And no, I'm not writing that book, but the history, I mean, people from Toronto used to come to Buffalo for their music and for their entertainment. And, you know, he was very close to some major managers and such, and brought in people that even some of the big cities couldn't bring in.
Right.
So one of his very good friends, and this is all about in the book, but when he started his career, he was in glove sales, of all things, in Fulton County, Gloversville. Yep. And his best friend there was Sam Goldwyn, of course.
Oh, okay.
He had a different name, Sam Goldfish back then, but he decided he wanted to go to New York and see if he could get into those fancy things called the movies. And he worked part-time gloves in a regional sales capacity and it kind of inspired Harry to do something similar, but come back to his hometown and do that. So I like that story too, but.
Yeah. So when did the town start and or was it here and it was something else? So, and I know you asked me, I haven't read the book yet, so I want to come in fresh too. I kind of.
Yeah, no, it makes.
I kind of like that. Yeah. Makes it.
So after he had his glove career, and he was a salesman. That was his strength, and that's what made him so successful, selling, you know, to managers, to performers, to people to come into the building, everything. He read about the Mardi Gras, which is ironic to be today as it is.
Yeah, it is.
The Mardi Gras in New Orleans, and he wanted to do the Mardi Gras in Buffalo. So he, being the good Jewish boy that he is, he picked November. And he picked the Broadway Auditorium, which was one of our municipal auditoriums back in the day. This is the 1920s, 1910s. And for several years, every Mardi Gras of his Mardi Gras, he would have this major dance and parade. And that's where he learned all his skills for project management and working with vendors and working with employees. And from there, he tried the family business for a little while. You're either going to be, if you're an Altman of that family, you're either in produce or you're in what they call the rag trade, so selling clothing or shoes. So for about 20 minutes, he tried that, and that lust for, performing. So during a period of about 15 years, he had a minimum of 8 or 9 nighteries, ballrooms, roller skating rinks. I tell anybody that anything that was flat, a big building that was flat, he would make something out of it. Ballrooms were very big back then. So he had several ballrooms. If that didn't work out, he would transition it to roller skating rink. He would, and he mixed and matched different investors all the way through. So probably right after the war, the 40s, he's still fumbling around trying to find the magic sauce to create a downtown casino. Now, to step back a minute, he had already taken over the Glen in 1932.
Okay.
But it was basically a mud puddle, and he had an open-air ballroom and a roller rink.
Okay.
And it had been an industrial site, so it needed a lot of coming back if you're going to make it a picnic grounds. But and so in 34, he goes bankrupt, personal bankrupt, but he keeps the Glen because he didn't have it under his own name. And that was his passion project, is to get something going. And he would actually have to take second jobs just to keep the Glen going. And he had a wife and he had 3 kids, and it was a struggle. But the success of the Glen Casino, which that open ballroom burned in 1936, and then he opens the Glen Casino a year later. And it was an 800-person facility or venue. And he had 3 shows a night. Like I said, the performers came in, and he was the lover of vaudeville, the Mike Shea era. So you never just went to see a headliner and an opening act. He would have all kinds of ancillary performers, whether it be acrobats, animal acts. So the shows ran 2.5 hours.
Wow.
And he would have an hour of dancing by the town casino orchestra, led by various orchestra leaders. And then while they could dance, he was moving new people in, cleaning up the tables, bringing in the new audience, and do it again twice more. The last show would start at 1:00.
Wow.
He really believed, and the only way you could fill that many seats every night for 7 nights is he had to speak to the working class.
Okay.
And so did Michael Shea. That was a cornerstone of his empire as well. You can't charge people a lot, but you have to make them believe that they're living a life that's very fancy, and it's got to be very glamorous. But you don't have to charge big admission costs. So that was Harry's theory too. So he starts having success at the Glen, and then he decides that the city is ripe for one too. Actually, the Glen used to run, which is kind of scary if you think about it, 12 months a year. And this is before the 290 was built. So you would go out into Route 5 in the middle of a snowstorm.
Yeah.
It was called the Winter Garden back then. And there was no time set for opening acts or anything. It started when you got there, basically.
Okay.
You kind of caught the show whenever time you arrived. But he really believed that he could make something. So I now go back to your original question. He starts what he called the victory room. He pretty much hops down up through the theater district, primarily 681, which is, of course, the address, not the of course, but the address of the town ballroom. But he also has many endeavors at the Otto Kent building, which is what we call the theater place across the street.
Okay.
So he would have a venue there for a while. If that didn't work, he would try something else. So he tries the Victory Room, which is something that happened during the war. And then one day he just gets enough cash to go across the street and take over for probably the second or third time 681. And at the time, it was called the Town Barn.
Okay.
So harkening back to the Glen. And it was in existence probably 2 to 3 years. And then you got to read the book to remember the date.
Right.
I don't have it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it's February of 45. The town barn burns to the ground in the middle of a blizzard. And by New Year's Eve, he had the town casino up and running.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so within 8 or 9 months, he had built this massive building. It's still there. Those of you who enjoy the town. And both Artie and Donnie have been amazing in keeping the flames going. But it could seat 1,200. And he had, as it is now, the atrium had a bar, which also played trios and such during the course of the day. And he builds upon that model. And if something, for whatever reason, air conditioning became a huge issue, and that was one of the reasons why the Glen was very advantageous, because if you remember those days, and even I can remember in the 60s and 70s, ladies and men that would go anywhere to a birthday party, you would all get all dressed up. And can you imagine sitting in a non-air conditioned room? As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it was Sophie Tucker that, she was like one of the last people to work the town casino under such heat. And then he realized that there's no way that he could keep that going, that he'd have to split, be the nice cool breeze of the Glen in the summer. And he was one of the first major businesses to entertainment businesses to put in a Carrier air conditioning system.
Wow.
And he put stickers on everything that he had a Carrier, so that people would come, because as you know, even in September and October, we can have warm days.
Right.
So basically 1945 is when the town casino begins.
Wow.
And it stays until 65. So he had it for 20 solid years before he sells it to the Studio Arena. So they took the ballroom, and I have pictures in the book of how they changed the layout of the ballroom into Studio Arena, and the seats for the theater. And then later on, a few years later, they go across the street where they next door on, which I believe is the Smith Theater now, and that becomes the second Studio Arena. He dies in 66, and he sells the Glen Casino in 65, the same year that he sells the town casino. By that time, nightclubs were dead. You had TV,
Right.
So you could watch anything you wanted in your robe and slippers and didn't have to get up. And just the idea that the performers didn't have to spend a week on the road with every contract they signed. And what really knocked him out of the box, if my own personal opinion, is Melody Fair. Because you could come in for 1 or 2 shows and then just move on.
Right.
You weren't stuck in a municipality and bring your a lot of the performers brought their families with them, because you were, like I said, same thing with the chorus girls. They weren't local. They would have to spend a whole season away from home. So there's a whole chapter on where they stayed when they were in town. And of course, the big performers, the Sammy Davis Juniors and the Victimones and what have you,
Mm-hmm.
they stayed at the Statler,
Okay.
no matter where they were performing.
Mm.
But there were village motels that we have pictures in the book of the Three Stooges
Huh.
out. Of course, they don't look like the Three Stooges,
Right.
you know, but they're out helping the kids catch fish in the creek and things like that. So, you know, the Smothers Brothers came, and people, you know, they were very popular because they also had a TV show. So,
Right.
but they'd be walking the village. You know, it was very common back then
Yeah.
to do all that.
No, that's kind of wild, because isn't it Tommy that lives up north?
Yep,
Like,
Lewiston, I believe.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
He's still a local boy. He married a local girl, so
Yeah.
to speak. But yes, they and when they were there, and he had some what you consider controversial acts now.
Right.
Of course, the Smothers Brothers,
Yeah.
Jackie Mason, but they were all there at the Glen or the town before they hit their controversial years.
Okay.
He wasn't, and I even make a statement in the book, you know, the reason he died is because there was no way he was going to listen to rock and roll music.
Oh.
So,
Yeah.
no interest at all.
Right.
He had a couple hootenannies.
Okay.
That's what he called them. And he would brought in like Eric Anderson and the Wayfarers, but
Mm-hmm.
he made it very clear that these are one-offs
Mm-hmm.
and don't expect that to happen too much
Right.
more. Now, of course, we all remember not everybody, but the Glen Casino turning into the Inferno.
Mm-hmm.
And that is after Harry dies.
Okay.
The Inferno is managed by his son-in-law, David Goldstein, who basically helped manage the Glen during the final years of Harry's life. He was dying of cancer. So, but the property, and I always want to be very clear about this because there's many discussions of how the Inferno burned, but it was not under the ownership of the Altman family. Harry sold in 1965,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time it was called Emprise, but now we call it Sports Service at Dover North.
Okay.
They bought that property from Harry. So David Goldstein leased the Inferno from Sports Service. And then, of course, the Inferno burned, and then that was in 1968, September of 1968. So it wasn't around very long, but had such a deep impact on our music community. And the building in the back, which we called the Family Inn or the barn, and it had like one night performers or people he didn't think had earned yet the stage of one of his major casinos or nightclubs. It was a very large building also,
Mm-hmm.
and it burned in 1973,
Okay.
both being two of the largest fires ever in Erie County history because they were huge and they were wood and they probably had pennies in the fuses still.
Oh, yeah.
So that ended the Altman era. In 1973 was the rides were then gone, both buildings were gone, and then it was up to the village and the owners at the time, Sports Service, to determine what to do with the property after that. So that is pretty much where the book ends,
Mm-hmm.
is when the last fire occurs.
Right. Well, it's yeah. I would love to have been, alive during those days. I mean, I've heard so many stories about, big bands back in those days could play 6-7 days a week,
Multiple
make
times,
a living.
yeah.
They were constantly playing. There were all kinds of spots to go, and where there was a big band, you could dance. It was like you said, you got dressed up. Everyone, they all wear suits and hats, and just a different time.
And
And I know, in the 60s, and clubs like the Peppermint Stick, and you had teen clubs, and the rock and roll was coming around, and of course Bandstand and Hullabaloo, and all those shows were on TV, and it was changing, and
Goldstein, prior to taking over or starting the Inferno, he had Club Commodore, which was on Genesee Street,
Mm-hmm.
which was a teen nightclub,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So he was pretty much wired into that whole scene very relatively,
Right.
quickly. And the opportunity to take over the Glen Casino and serve liquor must have been it was 35 cents for an Iroquois beer.
Wow.
And, because they didn't have to necessarily sit down, they could stand. It could 1,000 kids easily could get in there a night.
Right.
And people waited in line, all the way down Glen Avenue when Wilmer and the Dukes and such would play the very popular bands.
Yeah.
And he found, and I'm talking about David Goldstein here, he found some very new talent that went on to become major talent. So Buffalo was the start of a lot of that.
Right. Well, before we got on air, we were talking a lot about Raven and playing there at the Inferno, and of course they have a very famous album called Raven Live at the Inferno, and of course it has photos of the fire on the front there. But they didn't play like right before the fire, did they? Or
they were the house band.
They were the house band.
Yep.
Okay.
But they weren't the house band, or they weren't in the building the night it burned.
Okay.
They were, I don't know where they all were. I don't remember offhand, but
right.
The Brass Buttons
was
in the Inferno before the fire. And of course the Inferno fire itself, the Inferno of the Inferno happened about 2:00 in the morning. So the building was empty at that point.
Okay.
And one of the porters noticed the fire, so called it in. But yes, Raven was the house band back there, and they were very loyal to the Inferno during the time there.
Mm-hmm. Now, I can imagine all of the famous names that played at the town casino and the town and the Glen Park casino. I know you mentioned Melody Fair. I mean, my parents during the 60s and 70s, I grew up in Fredonia, and they used to come up to Buffalo all the time to see shows. And they always talked about Melody Fair, Kleinhans. I don't ever remember them talking about coming to the town or the Glen. That doesn't mean they didn't.
Right.
But I just don't remember they also didn't tell us a lot of those stories either.
That's true. Kept it to themselves.
Yeah, they were, but they were, I always say they were kind of that Mad Men era. They were, I always said, Mom, why do you get your hair done on Friday instead of on Monday to go? Because she was a school teacher. Well, because we go out on the weekend. They always went out on Saturday night. Always. There was a club down in Dunkirk called Rush's Restaurant, which is kind of the same. That was Dunkirk's version, and they'd go dancing and jazz and all that, and just such a different time.
Right. Well, a lot of people that I spoke to, and even I believe at the town ballroom now, they honor this, but they had the mostly women walking around with the cameras where you take a picture of your table, and then at the end of the night you pay $1 and you get a sleeve that says Town Casino or Glen Casino, and people throw a lot of photographs away because they don't know who those people are, and they're in there, but they are, I would say every street in not just Williamsville, in the area has a few of those somewhere in those houses. And I believe Donnie and Artie have created a wall of all those pictures because you don't know what to do with them, and you don't want to throw them out, and they're in such a pretty little package.
Yeah.
And most of the time the names are underneath, people and they're either very intimate of things where, it's Valentine's Day and it's mom and dad.
Sure.
Or it's a table full of family for an event, somebody's anniversary or something. So that has brought and a lot of people met at those places, or they got engaged at those places. So it's part of so many people's family lore.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the town casino really finished its heyday, even though it gets sold in 65. The end of the 50s, it was pretty much the end of those big 3 times a night shows. So
Right.
depending on your parents' age, but again, those pictures have carried on. The Glen has its lot of memories because you could be a lot younger and have gone on those amusement rides.
Right.
And he tended to bring in teen heartthrobs to the Glen. So
Okay.
if you wanted to see Frankie Avalon or any of that, he would have birthday parties for these singers. I don't even know sure it was their birthday, but he'd bring a big cake in the middle of the Glen, and the parents and their kids were begging to go, and he had toward the end a relatively solid deal with Sattlers, and so these performers would go to Sattlers and sell their records there.
Okay.
So he had some cross promotion, but he was pretty much, especially with the Glen, a solo operator. He really controlled that property really strongly.
Wow.
And it's all cash if you think about it. There's,
Yeah.
I talked to people from the Inferno who worked there, and they couldn't even close the drawers of the registers. There was so much money coming in. And if you think about the town casino or the Glen casino, you didn't go there with a check or
Right.
Amex. It's all cash all the time. And again, he was very conscious of the workman's money.
Sure.
And he had that 1:00 show so that the second shift people could go.
Right.
And they did. They loved that. Get the opportunity to see some major performers. He also had a very strong connection with Arthur Godfrey, which I know he's kind of lost in our time.
Yeah.
But Arthur was the American Idol of his era.
Yeah.
And he had 2 or 3 radio shows a week. I mean, daily shows. And then he had his television shows, at least 2 of them always going. And he had his set group of, they call them Little Godfreys.
Okay.
And Harry usually had first choice of them when they left the world of the Godfrey. Godfrey kept them very close to him. They usually didn't perform outside of the radio show and the television show.
Okay.
But when it's time for them, Julius LaRosa, whatever, it was Harry usually was the first to bring them in.
Oh, wow.
And so lines would form when these major performers for the first time were actually that they had seen on TV and loved. They were actually could be seen live. And so Harry took great advantage of that too.
Right. Well, and I know on the Arthur Godfrey show was a local Buffalo band called the Buffalo Bills Barbershop Quartet.
That is true. Yes.
Yeah. So
he had, beside his Little Godfreys, he also brought in other talent, and one of the shows would vote on who the best of that week was and all of that. He had, Arthur had quite a gig going during the prime, and these again, like mid-50s.
Right.
But again, Harry, took these, as a matter of fact, some of them stayed loyal their entire careers. They would do anything for Harry because he was the first person to ever put them on a live stage that wasn't televised, and he taught them how to play to the audience, and so they were very dedicated to him.
Right. Now, were they booking a lot of big bands also, like the Glenn Miller Orchestra and all those folks?
Yes, that Harry, I obviously have not spoken to him,
Right.
but it appears that he had a much love of jazz and big band music. He had orchestras. Usually that's most of the time because the Glen was open when the town wasn't, and he had the Clark Bono Orchestra, and he had his own house orchestras that had very prominent local performers. But he also paid for the performers that they had orchestras or other orchestras as well. Benny Goodman, for instance, he is in the book because he did some of his radio shows very early on at the Glen.
Oh, wow.
and so they, national feed came out of Williamsville,
Right.
and there was right at the end when the town casino was just sputtering along,
Mm-hmm.
he opens a jazz room, and he brings in all the greats and people who remember that, because it was every week it was somebody better than the other, and very reasonable again, like a dollar or two, and no requirement to drink or anything like that. So that was, I think, his own personal love, was that type of music. And like I said, I would say jumped into the grave when anything beyond that happened.
Right. That's, well, of course, in the 50s too, that was when, oh gosh, I lost my train of thought, but I know the Bills were big, and there was a lot of those bands that were, I watched, the Benny Goodman story, with, what was it, Steve Allen played Benny Goodman. Of course, Sammy Davis Jr.'s dad was in the band, they found him on the road. And I can imagine how many stories like that where people were playing, and I don't, how many people got stolen, if you will, and, come play with my band and come do this. And
Right. Bobby Jones, of course,
yeah,
him.
yeah,
Sammy took him on.
right.
Sammy was probably the best known performer of Altman's career. He started with the Master Trio, came in when Sammy was 11, and he would bring him in regularly.
Right.
Always the trio, and sometimes even when the trio wasn't playing, only Sammy was.
Mm-hmm.
He still advertised that they all is as an honor to them. But he played the Glen, he played the town, he played bingo in the Glen. He was a very loyal, and I can't remember, Eddie Fisher, who had a famous television show back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And Sammy appeared on it.
Okay.
And is it Fisher came and he wiped the brow of Sammy when he was tap dancing, and it was considered,
Oh gosh, yes, yeah.
absolutely. And Sammy thought his career was over, never to be seen again. And it wasn't, he wasn't the one that ran onto the stage, but
Right.
it didn't matter. So they threatened the host that they were going to pull their advertisements, and the host, what he did was he booked Sammy the next week. He was a stubborn man. But anyway, Harry was the first person to bring Sammy back into the nightclubs. And of course, everybody held their breath, not knowing what the response.
Right.
And it was sold out, and he extended it another week. So Sammy was very, very loyal to Harry. And even in his books, his memoirs, and ever, Harry's mentioned for his loyalty. We talked a little bit about Sophie
Tucker.
Yeah, Sophie Tucker. She's also a very early and strong, frequent performer. And of course, that's a generation earlier, or a time earlier, but she would come regularly throughout her entire career.
Yeah.
She has strong connections to Jack Yellen, of
Right.
course, of Buffalo. So he wrote a few songs for her.
Yeah.
And he was actually the cousin of Harry's partner, Harry Wallens. So, they were all interconnected. So she would come regularly. There are some that are just known for their frequent appearances. And again, there's only two people that he always said that he wanted that did not come. Perry Como, for some reason, never came, and neither did Frank Sinatra Sr. Jr. did appear, but not Sr. But those are the only two he really wanted Sinatra Sr. because he said, he could retire from the money he'd make from bringing him in. But all the great crooners of that era, Johnny Ray was also a very frequent performer, a name that's, I believe, has really been lost to time in many ways, based on the popularity of his time when he was,
Right.
you know, the number one hits he had and the groupies he had and all of that. But
Yeah.
he was also a lot of African American performers. He was certainly, you know, Johnny Mathis was a common person
Sure.
too. So he was not afraid of much.
Mm-hmm. Now, did he have any connections or any kind of, because I know, you know, the Colored Musicians Club was, of course, big here in Buffalo, and they had the first, you know, black music union. So was there any connection there with Harry and with that kind?
Doesn't, I mean, there was a lot of African American performers, but nothing that I could determine was directly related. I did
Okay.
call them a few times, and they didn't have a lot for me to share.
Right.
Was it Local 49? It was an earlier.
Local 533 was what I've got their
Okay.
original banner hanging in the back behind you. So I had to look over your shoulder, but yeah, they were the very first.
Right.
You
And
know,
then
black-
and then the regular musicians unit of that era.
Yeah, I can't remember because then they merged, I think, in
Yeah, it doesn't.
early 70s or something like that.
It's in the 40s. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah.
And Harry did all kinds of crazy things. He was very, very, very a philanthropist. So he would take his performers out and go to different hospitals and Perrysburg, which was a major one for him, which was at that time a TB hospital.
Right.
And during the summer, he would ask the guest performers, including Sophie Tucker and anybody that was there, to get on buses, and they would drive to Perrysburg. And the unions all supported them too. So and he did that for Buffalo State Psychiatric Unit. He did throughout his entire career have a lot of extra events, including, for those probably, the Funoramas, they were called. It was very big events in Offerman Stadium for the Police Benevolent Society.
Okay.
And he would put that together every year. And major talent came in free to perform for thousands of people. He'd have a afternoon for the kids and an evening for the adults. And so he put that together every year. He would have Thanksgiving dinners for the blind, and I believe it was the town. Just philanthropy, and even in his will, he left a lot of his money to different not-for-profits.
Oh wow, that's amazing. So we're getting close to the top of the hour, Susan. So, any other great like nuggets of stories that you can end up with that maybe just like one specific performer or something that I know we talked off air. I had always heard the story that, and you just kind of confirmed, Sinatra never did perform at the town, and I always heard he was with the Dorsey Band, at the town, and that's when he decided to leave the Dorsey Band. So
no, I think he was at the Dorsey Band at Shays, or whatever Shays was at that time. But
Gotcha.
It was the last performance that he had done, and the bus actually left without him.
Okay.
So, but it was not.
But it was not the town
casino. Okay. I know that Sammy Davis Jr. had a revolver, a Colt revolver, spinning ability, and when he was in the Glen, it got stolen from his dressing room. So that was a major thing. We mentioned Jayne Mansfield.
Okay.
That was a very big event. That was toward the end of, it would have been 63, 64, where she came to the Glen.
Wow.
Her first nightclub appearance. But it's a great documentary out there right now, Mom and Mother and Me, by her daughter. Anyway, the bottom line was, beautiful woman, many talents, but not nightclub talent.
Okay.
She didn't sing, she didn't dance, but she sold out, and he would actually announce many times how much he was paying these performers. Like,
okay.
I can't believe I paid $18,000 a week for her, or not necessarily for her, but for anybody, the McGuire sisters or whatever.
Right.
And I know he got mad at Andy Williams once because, he just wasn't a draw. He had a television show every week,
Right.
and he wanted his own orchestra and everything. And Harry had a fit that, he had to pay for all that, and the draw just wasn't there. But Jayne
Right.
Mansfield was,
Huh.
I mean, she showed up late like Marilyn Monroe does,
Right,
like,
yeah.
like an hour or two late, and everybody just sat there and waited. It didn't matter. And it was a satire on burlesque.
Okay.
So at one point during the production, like fog and smoke arises, and she does a partial strip, and you can't see it anyway, but just the idea of Mike being able to see something was
Sure.
a major deal. But he paid her a lot, but he was extremely happy about it. And then she announced her divorce to Mickey Haggerty
Okay. Yep.
in the dressing room at the Glen,
Wow.
which brought all the national papers and reporters into Buffalo to talk about that. And then right after the show, her week of performance, she went to Mexico and dissolved that marriage. So Caruso Jr., the great opera performer.
Right.
He did his first U.S. performance for Harry. So there was always, he was always looking for something new and exciting.
Yeah. Now, did when Andy Williams was in town, did he bring the Osmond brothers with him?
He
at
did
all?
not.
He
No,
did not.
he did not do that. I'm sorry, the guy with the big nose guy.
Oh, Jimmy Durante.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was, Sammy was the number one draw the entire history, like of the town casino.
Okay.
But Durante was the number one for many years, and he brought his entire television performers.
Right.
So everybody that was on his show, and there's a big picture with Wallens and Altman and a cake and Durante and all his performers around him. So some did come with other people, but as I said, he often brought so many other, you just didn't go see Durante, you just didn't come see Sammy. There was so many other
Right.
performers that wrapped around each of those shows.
Yeah.
And people thought they were getting tremendous value for their money, and they really, really were.
Right. Good night, Mrs. Calabash.
That's right.
Wherever you are. Oh, yeah. Again, that had to have been, and I fortunately got a couple of goodies that from the Glen. I think it's from the Glen in the town, and of course one of them mentions Jackie Jocko.
Right.
Performing there. Of course, Jackie was just a stalwart here in Buffalo, and a fixture, especially down at the Hyatt there before he passed. And I've got some of his 78s from way back in the day. So,
and yeah, Harry introduced a lot of local performers at the Glen in the town. I mean, again, he was filling the plate every night.
Right.
And he, either names are coming to me. Young girl. Anyway, yes, he would bring in young talent every night, and some of them went on to bigger and better things and became national acts, and some just kind of dissolved into the ether and never was seen again. But
right.
He gave them a chance, and if the audience loved them, he would give them another chance. And like Bobby Jones would go on
Sure.
to follow Sammy with him. Lenny Page, who was the great MC for Harry, was constantly being offered opportunities to go. Sammy offered him a job with him. Several other performers did too, and in that case stayed loyal. But yeah, when it got really the dark times at the end in 64 and 65, it was almost all local acts. But
okay,
it was still an amazing place to be.
Now, we had kind of mentioned off air, and we've been messaging back and forth on social media for quite a while. One of my people that I really respect from Buffalo, Jackson C. Frank, was you said you couldn't find any like photos of him, but he did play. Was
It's
it
actually
Glen?
the opposite. I have a
Okay.
picture of him and 3 or 4 other performers on the steps of the
Okay.
Glen,
Yep. At the Glen.
but I couldn't find anything anywhere that brought him as a performer, and I just figured that they were using that as a backdrop.
Oh, okay.
And then, of course, after the book was published, somebody, it may have been you,
Yeah.
sent me an article where he was performing, but they don't even use his full name in
Right.
the article. So I think they just call him Jackson, which
Mm-hmm.
meant nothing to me. Could have been
Right.
Michael for all I knew. But anyway, and it's there's a few regrets that I have of people that I missed,
Right.
you know, and of course this was bound to happen because as the book is very popular and people are seeing holes and said, you know, you didn't mention this person or didn't
Sure.
mention that
Oh,
person,
gosh,
whatever.
yes. Yeah.
Nothing major, thankfully, but
Mhm.
that is one that I personally regret
Right.
because what a story he had. I did get Eric Anderson in there, which I, appreciate because
Mhm.
that was the very first show he ever did. He was still in Amherst High School.
Wow.
And then the money he got from working in the Glen at the Hootenanny, he went to California, ended up back in New York, and
Mhm.
it became, what it became. But he had Dick Shawn was a relative of
Right.
Harry's.
Okay. Yep.
And I think, and this is just an aside, but I think Dick Shawn, if anybody, broke his heart the most. At the end, again, in 64 and 65, when he's really struggling, he's dying of cancer. People are staying home. The Melody Fair is still spinning along. Okay. And he actually, one of the last press releases that he posted, and Harry was known for his press releases. That man never stopped
Mhm.
creating them, was that he was going to start his own theater in the round concept in the North Towns.
Mm.
He was really mad. But the reason why Shawn broke his heart, I believe, is because Shawn went over and worked Melody Fair. And here you are, not only do so many others,
Mm-hmm.
but a family member. And he had promoted him all these years. And not
Right.
only did they have, Dick Shawn's coming, but he would put Dick Shawn's real name, which of course it wasn't that, so that all his family would come and attend. And, he used to sit in the audience during rehearsals and such before he made it big to learn stagecraft. And, he was one of many that left the casinos to go to Melody Fair. But, you really, again, you can't blame them. It's a 1 or 2 night gig.
Right.
You get paid, you get out. And it was just the way the market played at that time. And it was one thing that Harry always had was the ability to recognize upcoming fads or, trends. He was, early on, he had a marathon dance company that he would, when that was a really hot thing. So he did it at Danceland in Seabreeze in Rochester. And he was, one of the major promoters of that. And when that fad died down, he would just, look for something else to switch to.
Right.
And that at the end, it just got him. He was so solid on believing that how can you not live without a nightclub? This is where you come up. This is where you learn your craft.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And how could he be abandoned? And how could all of them be abandoned? And,
right.
And most of them abandoned right to the stages of Las Vegas. So, so that is a very interesting thing. But Mansfield is one of my favorite stories because there's pictures of him walking. She's got a little puppy with her. I mean, not a puppy, a little tiny dog. It's all fluffy. And Harry's on her arm. And he is one happy man.
I would imagine. Well, Susan, I can't thank you enough for coming down and telling these stories. And before we sign off, though, how can people get a copy of the book?
Okay, that's a good question. It is in most local independent bookstores in Buffalo. It is online at Amazon, at Walmart. Amazon is probably the number one place. It's both in hardcover and softcover, and I just released the e-version. So if you have Kindle or whatever, you can read it there. I'm still trying to decide whether I want to do an audiobook, but
okay.
right now that's but yeah, one of the hottest places, because I was not going to release the book until like this time. But I was pushed pretty heavily to get it out before Christmas. So it was available nationally at Christmas, but a lot of people wanted to buy local. So Ed Young's in Williamsville.
There you go.
They sold hundreds of them because, that was the Glen time. And I know that we'll be doing some cooperative work with the town ballroom in the months to come.
Okay.
And I'll be doing a big event at the downtown library. They offered me their auditorium in April.
Nice.
So I'll be doing a lot of speaking. You'll see my name locally, University Express or whatever. I'll be speaking on either Harry or the town or the Glen. I have different presentations based on the interest of the group. So, but yes, the books are on Amazon and in most local bookstores.
Well, that's fantastic. I will have links on rockabillygreg.com. So if anyone is interested, you can go to my website. I'll have a link to Susan's website, so you can get a lot more information on the book and her and all the things that she's doing. I know you can find her on Facebook, and I think there's a separate Harry Altman page on Facebook. I'll have those links also on there too. So again, Susan,
thank you.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I love hearing these stories, and let's keep Harry's memory alive.
Yes, I agree. And Harry Wallens too. Wallens family, the Altman family of Harry Altman. He had 7 siblings, and many of them are still here. But Harry Wallens, which was partner in downtown, they have stayed local, and they've been very kind to my project as well. So
that's fantastic.
I call them the Harrys.
The Harrys. Harry squared.
Yep.
So again, thanks for coming down. And
Thank
for
you.
everybody who's tuned in, I hope you've had just as much fun as we have. And I hope it's kind of sparked your curiosity to go get the book and learn more about both the Town Casino and the Glen Park Casino / the Inferno. And hear about more of those stories that happened back in the day. That's what we're trying to do here at the podcast, and get some of those stories. And there's so many of them to tell. So hopefully I'll be around for quite a long time to help tell these stories and give everybody an opportunity to get on here and tell their stories. So, but as always, if you need to find the podcast, you can find it where you get your podcasts, at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audible, thebuffalohive.com, YouTube, and of course, you can always find the podcast at rockabillygreg.com, where it's all about the music, and I will have some photos and some links and bios and stuff like that up there, so you can get a little bit of a snapshot of Harry and Susan, and again, a link to their page so you can find out more information. So again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. In the Flamingo Lounge is made possible in part by CatsLikeUs.com, your online store for authentic vintage clothing and accessories. Buffalo Ironworks, an intimate live music venue and bar located in the Cobblestone District in downtown Buffalo. And by Diamond Hawk Golf Course and Pub, Western New York's premier golf course, restaurant, and banquet facility. At the Hawk, the bar is hopping year-round with live music every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, and some other nights, too. Tune in for a new episode every Saturday at 9 a.m. EST at rockabillygreg.com, where it's all about the music. Bark, Zoe, bark. Good girl.